I never thought I'd end up working at a gas station. It wasn't part of some grand plan or a stepping stone to something better. It just happened. My old job at the diner shut down, and I needed something fast. The station was hiring, and the manager didn't ask too many questions. I started the next week. The place is small, just 4 pumps, a cramped convenience store, and a single restroom that always smells like bleach and mildew. The night shift is slow, which I don't mind. Most people just want gas or a bag of chips and they're in and out. But then there's Carl. His name was the first thing he ever told me. "Carl," he said, in that slow, gravelly voice the first time he came in to buy cigarettes. He was big, not just tall, but solid, like a man who had spent years lifting things heavier than he should. His face was lined and rough, his eyes dark and unreadable. Something about him made my skin prickle. At first, he was just another customer. He'd come in, buy a pack of cigarettes, nod at me, and leave. Then he started lingering. At first, he'd just take his time counting out change, his eyes never leaving mine as I rang him up. Then came the questions. "How long you been working here? You like the night shift? You here all by yourself?" His voice was slow, casual, but something about the way he asked made my stomach knot. Then last week, things changed. It was around 2 a.m., and the place was dead. Carl came in like usual, but this time he didn't go straight for the cigarettes. Instead, he walked to the coffee machine, pouring himself a cup, moving slow, deliberate. I watched him from the counter, pretending to focus on the inventory list in front of me. "You know," he said, stirring his coffee lazily, "you're always here when I come in, night after night. Don't you ever get tired of it?" I forced a smile. "It's not so bad. Quiet, you know? Quiet's good." He took a sip, eyes locked on mine. "But it can get lonely, too. Don't you ever feel lonely?" I shrugged. "Not really. I like the peace." He nodded like he understood, like he had already known what I was going to say. Then he leaned in, just slightly. "You ever think about leaving this place?" I hesitated. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Just seems like a waste, you know? A young girl like you stuck in a place like this. You could do better." I gripped my pen a little tighter. "I'm fine, really. It's just a job." Carl didn't blink. "You sure about that?" He leaned in closer, his breath thick with coffee and smoke. "Because I could help you, if you wanted, get you out of here." Every instinct in me screamed to get away, but I kept my voice steady. "Thanks, but I'm good." He stared at me for a long moment, then took a step back. "Suit yourself." He paid for his coffee and left, the bell jingling behind him. I thought that was the end of it. I hoped it was. But when I glanced outside a few minutes later, Carl was still there. He was leaning against his car, standing in the shadows near the pumps, a cigarette between his fingers. He wasn't getting gas. He wasn't doing anything. He was just watching. I turned away, pretending I hadn't seen him. But when I looked back 5 minutes later, he was gone. I should have felt relieved. But something gnawed at me, and then at 3 a.m. I heard something outside. A soft crunch of gravel. I froze, staring at the security monitors. The screen flickered slightly, static for just a second. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when I looked up at the glass doors, my breath hitched. A shadow. Just at the edge of the lot, standing still. I couldn't see a face, couldn't even tell if it was Carl, but I knew. My hand shook as I reached for the lock and slid the bolt into place. And then, just as I did, the fluorescent lights above me flickered. Just once. Just enough to make my stomach drop. I checked the monitors again. The shadow was gone, but I still felt watched. At 3:30, I heard the back door creak. I froze. That door was supposed to stay locked. Slowly, I turned my head toward the storage room. The back door was just beyond it, leading to the alley behind the station. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. Then, a thump. Something hit the door from outside. I jumped back, gripping the counter. The doorknob rattled. Once, twice. Then, nothing. I waited, holding my breath. 5 seconds. 10. When I was sure the silence wasn't going to break again, I grabbed a flashlight from under the counter. My hands were shaking as I moved toward the storage room. I hesitated at the door. Then, gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I unlocked it and pulled it open. Cold air rushed in. The alley was empty. But then I looked down. 2 cigarette butts, still faintly smoking, lay crushed near the doorway. Carl had been here, standing outside in the dark, smoking, watching, thinking. I slammed the door shut and locked it again, my breath coming fast. By the time morning came, I'd already made up my mind. I went straight to my manager and told him I wanted to switch to day shifts. I didn't even try to explain why. I just said I needed the change. He didn't argue, and I never saw Carl again. Before we dive into the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching. Back in 2017, I was working late shifts, and exhaustion was my constant companion. It was another long night, and all I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and collapse into bed. But as I glanced at my dashboard, I realized my gas tank was nearly empty. The last thing I needed was to break down in the middle of the night. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, a rundown place with flickering lights and a faded sign that looked like it hadn't been replaced since the 90s. The whole place felt abandoned, except for the distant hum of the ice machine and the occasional buzzing of a faulty street lamp. I parked by the nearest pump, stretched my legs, and walked inside. The attendant, a heavy-set guy in a faded uniform, barely acknowledged me as I handed over some cash. I paid for my gas, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and stepped back outside. That's when I saw him. He was sitting on the curb near the entrance, his back against the wall of the building. He looked rough, dirty, torn clothes, matted hair, and a face shadowed with stubble. A cardboard sign was propped up next to him, but I couldn't read what it said. I kept my head down and walked toward my car, but as soon as I stepped outside, he stood up. "Hey," he called out, his voice raspy. "Got any spare change?" I shook my head, not looking at him. "Sorry, I don't carry cash." It was a lie, but it was easier than getting into a conversation. I kept walking, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Come on," he said, his voice rising. "Just a few bucks. You can spare that, can't you?" I stopped, my pulse quickening. I said I don't have any cash. His eyes flicked to my back pocket. "You're lying. I see your wallet right there." I instinctively pushed it deeper into my pocket, but it was too late. He knew I had money. "Just give me something," he said, his voice harder now. I took a step back. "I can't help you." His eyes darkened. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said quickly, my heart pounding. "That's not it." But he wasn't listening anymore. He took another step closer, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You've got money," he muttered. "You've got everything, and you won't spare a few bucks." I backed away again, but this time, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small and metallic. My stomach dropped when I realized it was a knife. "Give me your wallet," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I froze. The gas station door swung open. "Hey!" The attendant's voice cut through the night. The panhandler flinched, glancing over his shoulder. In that split second, I bolted backward. The attendant stepped onto the pavement, his face set in a hard glare. I said, "What the hell's going on out here?" I pointed at the panhandler, my voice shaking. "He's got a knife." But by the time the words left my mouth, the guy was already gone, bolting into the darkness, disappearing into the night. The attendant let out a frustrated sigh. "Damn it. He comes around from time to time, some kind of creepy lunatic." I swallowed hard, still trying to catch my breath. "He ever hurt anyone?" "Not that I know of," he said. "But he's bad news. You're lucky I came out when I did." I didn't argue. I just nodded, hurried to my car, and got the hell out of there. But the worst part, that wasn't the last I saw of him. The next night, as I was driving home, I saw him standing on the side of the road, his cardboard sign in hand, staring at me as I passed. And the night after that, he was there again. I started taking a different route home, but no matter which way I went, he always seemed to find me. It's been weeks now, and I still see him sometimes, standing on the side of the road, watching me as I drive by. I don't know what he wants or why he's following me, but I do know one thing. I'll never stop at that gas station again. I should have just kept driving. That's what I tell myself every time I replay that night in my head. But hindsight doesn't change anything, and I didn't know then what I know now. It started with a simple mistake, one I didn't even realize I'd made. A few nights ago, I was driving home from my sister's place, an hour and a half outside the city. It was late, and the two-lane highway was practically empty, except for me and a few scattered headlights in my rear view. I wasn't speeding, just cruising at a steady pace, music low, windows cracked. Then at some point, I merged back into the right lane after passing a slow-moving truck. A big lifted Ford, the kind that took up more space than it should. Maybe I cut too close, maybe I misjudged the distance. I didn't think much of it until the truck suddenly roared past me, engine growling as it swerved back into my lane just ahead. A brake check, sharp, aggressive. I tapped my brakes, heart pounding. What the hell was his problem? He stayed in front of me for a while, deliberately slow, forcing me to either tailgate or pass him again. I chose the latter, taking a deep breath as I moved back into the left lane. As soon as I did, he veered off onto an exit. I exhaled. Maybe I got lucky, and he was just some road-raging idiot heading somewhere else. But looking back, I think that's when he started following me. I was too tired to notice. It was one of those all-night stops, the kind that felt too bright, too exposed. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering in places, making everything look a little washed out. I was the only one at the pumps, though a few cars sat in the lot by the store, their drivers inside. I swiped my card, started filling up, and checked my phone. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The Ford. It was parked at the far end of the lot, near the edge of the light. Not at a pump, just sitting there. A man sat in the driver's seat, head tilted slightly, looking in my direction. I pretended not to notice. Maybe it was nothing. Then he lifted his phone. The flash went off. I froze. Another flash. He was taking pictures of me, my car, my license plate. I turned toward him, anger pushing past the unease. "Hey!" He didn't even flinch, just lowered his phone and smiled, a small, polite thing, like we were strangers exchanging nods in a grocery store. I stepped closer. "What the hell are you doing?" His head tilted, considering. Then in a voice so casual it made my skin crawl, he said, "Just making sure I remember you." Then he started his truck and drove off. I told myself it was nothing. Some weirdo with a camera fetish, maybe. Some guy who got pissed that I cut him off earlier and wanted to rattle me. It worked. I told myself not to think about it, and for a couple of days I didn't. Then I saw the truck again. I was coming home late from work, exhausted, already thinking about showering and crashing in bed. My apartment complex was quiet, mostly dark, just a few lit windows scattered across the buildings. And then as I turned into the lot, headlights. Idling near the entrance, just outside the reach of the streetlights, sat a big Ford truck. It didn't move, didn't follow me in, just sat there, watching. I parked, forcing myself not to look over, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I peeked through the blinds. The truck was gone. I barely slept that night. It was 2 nights later when I realized it wasn't over. I woke up to a glow in my dark bedroom. My motion detector light in the backyard had switched on. I turned toward my window, heart thudding. It was 3 a.m. I hesitated, swallowing hard, then forced myself to look. A man was moving through my backyard. I sucked in a sharp breath, barely stifling a gasp. He wasn't running, wasn't sneaking, just walking, slow and steady like he had all the time in the world. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, but before I could dial, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned on every single light in my house. Porch lights, living room lights, bedroom light. The moment the backyard lit up, the man stopped. For the first time I got a good look at him. Tall, broad shoulders, a ball cap casting a shadow over his face. I couldn't see his expression, but I didn't need to, because after a long, still moment, he just turned and walked back toward the fence. I called the cops. They came fast, searched the area, but by then he was gone. They asked if I had any enemies, if I'd noticed anyone following me. I told them about the Ford, the photos, but without a license plate, without anything more than my word and a gut feeling, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to be careful, suggested I stay somewhere else for a few nights. So I did. I went to my sister's, slept with the doors locked, tried to convince myself it was over, and maybe it was, because after that night, I never saw the truck again. But sometimes, even now, I get the feeling I'm being watched, and I wonder if somewhere out there, someone still remembers me.